Why is there something rather than nothing? That question, made famous by Gottfried Leibniz, is not a clickbait slogan. It is a serious philosophical puzzle. If nothing at all had ever existed, nothing could have ever begun. So why is there a world? Why is there a cosmos, a history, instead of just sheer emptiness? In this video, I want to examine one of the most important and rigorous answers to that question. The contingency argument from explanatory termination. This style of argument has roots in Leibniz, of course, but has significantly developed in contemporary analytic philosophy by thinkers and philosophers such as Joshua Rasmussen and Alexander Proust. When these two philosophers did an online survey on the opinions of a necessary being, they found something remarkable. Over 94% of participants, including more than 93% of those who do not believe in a necessary being, accepted premises that, taken together, logically entail that one exists. As they themselves put it, the overall answer, including believers and non-believers alike, is 94.8%. Among disbelievers, the percentage is not much lower, 93.1%. My goal in this video is not to preach at you. Arguments about God are not religious moves to indoctrinate you, but it's to lead you into logical truths. As Proust said, it would be a philosophical mistake to leave the PSR to purely theological uses. Philosophy starts in wonder, and wonder impels to find reasoning for things. This video is to walk you through a series of academic argument to show you how, if we take explanation seriously, we are driven towards the existence of a necessary, self-existent being. And then to ask whether that being is best understood as God. Before we can even state the argument, we need some basic distinctions and definitions that are standard in metaphysics. Philosophers typically distinguish between contingent beings and necessary beings. A contingent being is something that exists, but can also fail to exist. For example, you, I, this planet, the galaxies, stars, trees, atoms, and so on and so forth. It's perfectly coherent to imagine a reality in which you never existed, or in a universe which never formed. A necessary being, by contrast, is something that cannot fail to exist. If it exists at all, it exists in every possible way reality could have been. Leibniz famously connected this to his principle of sufficient reason, the idea that no real fact is just a brute occurrence, but every genuine fact has a reason why it is so, and not otherwise. This will be the backbone of our argument, what we call and abbreviate PSR, Principle of Sufficient Reason. Now here's a precise way to formulate the contingency argument from explanatory termination. This argument contains two stages. The first stage will argue from a contingent reality to a necessary being. The second stage will explain how that necessary being is God. This is how the argument goes. Premise 1. Contingent beings exist. There are things that exist but could have failed to exist. Premise 2. Every contingent fact has an explanation. Premise 3. Let C be the total contingent fact, the fact that any contingent beings exist at all. C is contingent, since there could have been no contingent beings. Premise 4. Therefore, C has an explanation from premise 2 and premise 3. Premise 5. The explanation of C cannot be contingent, because any contingent explanator is a part of C and so cannot explain C as a whole. Premise 6. Therefore, the explanator of C is a necessary being that is not part of C. and necessary being cannot fail to exist and is not contingent. Conclusion 1. A necessary being, N, that explains the existence of all contingent reality, exists. Now, for stage 2, this argues how this necessary being has to be what we understand in classical theism as God. Premise 7. Whatever explains all contingent reality is the ultimate source of every contingent thing that exists. Premise 8. Anything that is material, temporal, or limited is contingent. Premise 9. Therefore, the necessary being is immaterial, timeless, and unlimited in power over contingent reality. Premise 10. To explain why one particular contingent world exists rather than another possible one, the ultimate explainer must be capable of a rational selection among alternatives. Premise 11. A reality that is necessary, immaterial, timeless, unlimited in power, and capable of rational selection among alternatives is a self-existent, rational, free mind. Conclusion 2. There exists a necessary, eternal, immaterial, supremely powerful, rational, and free mind that is the ultimate explanation of all contingent reality. Final conclusion. Therefore, God exists. Premise 1 is almost too obvious to be debated. Contingent beings exist. You exist. I exist. The physical universe has properties like mass or charge or constants that could have been otherwise. We can imagine even slightly different constants. We can imagine different histories or even no universe at all. Nothing in cosmology or physics really insists that there is a specific configuration of reality that has to be metaphysically necessary. So we can take premise 1 as fixed. There is at least some contingent reality. Now, premise 2 is where the argument really becomes serious. Every contingent fact has an explanation. Now, this is a restricted PSR, not the wild claim that everything whatsoever must be explained in the same way. It says, if something is genuinely contingent, if it could have been different or not at all existed, then there is some intelligible ground of reason for that fact. Why should we accept this? Well, first off, it underwrites science and rational inquiry. As the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy notes, the PSR is a powerful and controversial principle stipulating that everything must have a reason, cause, or ground. And it has driven some of the boldest and most challenging theses in the history of philosophy. Scientific practice assumes that if we see some puzzling contingent event, say, for example, an unexpected decay pattern, there is a reason. It's not just it happens for no reason. Refusing PSR leads to brute arbitrariness. As Joshua Rasmussen beautifully points out, causation is part of ordinary experience. Some realities have a cause, but not all realities. What accounts for the difference between the realities that have a cause and those that don't? There are two options. Either there is an informative answer to the question, or there isn't any informative answer. If there isn't any informative answer, then there is no causal order. We might as well expect any arbitrary properties to begin to be exemplified spontaneously at any time without a cause. But we don't expect that. Thus, we should expect that there is or are some informative answer, or answers, which can account for the difference between caused and uncaused realities. When speaking about the topic of PSR, Press says, an airplane crash is investigated thoroughly. No cause for the malfunction is found. The investigative team reports that the plane crashed for no course. We naturally object. You mean it crashed for no apparent cause. But the team insists that in fact there is no cause. Can we insist that there must have been a cause? The principle of sufficient reason claims we can. Everything that is the case must have a reason why it is the case. Now, some people might object, saying, If you say every contingent fact has a sufficient explanation, doesn't that lead to a modal collapse where nothing could have been otherwise, that everything becomes necessary? Well, the version of PSR that I am using avoids that. It does not say for every fact there is a necessary explanation that could have not been different. It says for every contingent fact, there is some explanation, maybe involving free choices, probabilities that could themselves have been different. So the PSR here is not destroying contingency, but it's saying contingent things have intelligible reasons, even if those reasons involve free or probabilistic factors. Now moving on to premise 3. Let C be the total contingent fact, the fact that any contingent beings exist at all. Now C here does not mean one particular thing like this galaxy or any other contingent being. What I mean by C here is the total fact that there are any contingent things at all. Everything that could have failed to exist, considered together as one big package. Since there could have been a reality in which no contingent beings exist, C itself is contingent. That's what I'm building into premise 3. From premise 2, every contingent fact has an explanation, and this description of C, we get premise 4. Therefore, C has an explanation. If C is contingent, and every contingent fact has an explanation, then C must have an explanation too. So the question is no longer, why does this galaxy exist? Or why does this person exist? But a much deeper question. Why is there any contingent reality at all instead of none? Leibniz already saw this. In one of his arguments, he notes that if you explain each book in a library by the previous one, this geometry book was copied from that one, which was copied from that one, and so on. You still have not explained why there are any such books at all. The explanatory demand eventually aims at the whole collection, not just each piece. That's the move for premise 3 and premise 4. So now we're no longer just asking, why does this person exist? But much deeper, why is there contingent reality instead of none? Now premise 5 is crucial. Once we accept that C, the total contingent fact, has an explanation, that's premise 4. The next step is, the explanation of C cannot be contingent. Premise 5. If the explanation were contingent, it would itself fall under C. Since C is the fact that there are any contingent beings, it would then be part of what needs explanation, not the ultimate explanation. Putting it formally, any contingent thing or contingent fact is included in C. Joshua Rasmussen talks about this and says, there's one requirement we insist on, the no circularity requirement. More exactly, if X causes a property to be exemplified, then X can exist without exemplifying the very property it causes to be exemplified. The basic idea here is that giving a cause of the exemplification of a property explains, at least in part, why that property is exemplified in the first place. So if X already has the very properties whose exemplification is to be explained, then the explanation is circular, which is not an appealing result. Thus, the explanation for C must lie outside of C and must itself be non-contingent. This is what we call a necessary being. Thus, the explanatory termination step. Explanation terminates, not in a dead brute fact, but in a being that explains its own existence by its very nature, and is therefore capable of explaining contingent reality without itself needing a further explanation of the same sort. Now some might say, but what if reality is just an infinite change of contingent things, and each one explained by another before it, and so on? Maybe there's no single necessary foundation, maybe it's just contingent beings all the way down. The problem is that this still does not explain C itself, the total fact that there are any contingent beings at all. Explaining each link in an infinite chain still leaves the existence of the entire chain unexplained. Even if every book in a library is explained by a previous book, that does not explain why there are any books at all. At some point, the explanation has to step outside of the collection of contingent things. That's exactly what the argument from explanatory termination is doing. Thus, we logically proceed to premise 6, which is, therefore, the explanation of C is a necessary being, N, that is not part of C. Which then leads to the first conclusion of our argument. Conclusion 1, a necessary being, N, that explains the existence of all contingent reality, exists. So far, we've come to our conclusion that a necessary being that explains the existence of all contingent reality exists. That already is a huge conclusion, but it is not yet obviously the God of classical theism. We still have to ask, what is that necessary being like? Is it material or immaterial? Is it temporal or timeless? Personal mind, impersonal mathematical or physical structure? Premise 7. Whatever explains all contingent reality is the ultimate source of every contingent thing that exists. If a necessary being explains C, the total fact of every contingent being that exists, then everything contingent depends on N, necessary being. So N isn't just one more thing in the universe, it's the ultimate source of all contingent things. Now, some might ask, and some might try to object and claim, saying that N can be a part of the necessary physical universe. Some might suggest that the universe itself, or multiverse, exists necessarily. But this faces two problems. First, all the indicators from physics suggest that our universe could have been different. Different constants, different laws, different initial conditions. This is quite literally the definition of contingency. Second, posting that the physical universe exists by necessity does not obviously explain why it has this structure rather than others, even if one calls that structure necessary. Material things are typically contingent. Alexander Pruss and others argue that anything extended in space and time, composed of parts and governed by change, is precisely the kind of thing that can fail to exist. Matter comes from being and passing away, does not wear necessity on its face. So there is a strong reason to think that a necessary being has to be immaterial, non-temporal, meaning non-dependent on time's flowing and without contingent parts. Furthermore, Rasmussen emphasizes a necessary being that explains C must have causal power to bring about contingent reality. It cannot be a mere abstract entity like the number 2, which describes but does not cause. Now, let's go to premise 8. Anything that is material, temporal, or limited is contingent. If something is made of matter, exists in time, or has any limited power or being, then it could have been otherwise, or not existed at all. And we were just speaking about this right before. So now combine this with what we already know. This necessary being, N, is not contingent and explains all contingent reality from the earlier stages and premise 7. And with this premise, anything material, temporal, or limited is contingent. So we continue on to premise 9. Therefore, the necessary being N is immaterial, timeless, and unlimited in power over contingent reality. One final step remains in the argument, and it's quite crucial. Is this necessary being personal, a mind with intellect and will, or impersonal, blind necessity? Here's a key thought, found in different forms in the works of thinkers like Swinburne and Rasmussen. The total space of reality includes many possible contingent worlds, different configurations of matters, different laws, or perhaps nothing at all. Our world is not the only conceivable arrangement. It is one of many possibilities. So we can ask, why does this contingent world exist rather than some other or none? Here, we introduce another very important and crucial premise. Premise 10. To explain why one particular contingent world exists rather than another one, the ultimate explainer must be capable of rational selection among alternatives. If the necessary being is purely impersonal, with no rational will or freedom, it is very hard to see how it can be an adequate explanation of why this world obtains rather than a different possible one. An impersonal necessary structure might entail only one possible configuration, but our universe looks deeply contingent and open to alternatives. By contrast, if the necessary foundation is a rational mind, then we have a clear explanation. The world exists as a result of a free, rational choice by that mind. As Rasmussen puts it, the necessary foundation would have the power and freedom to produce various contingent realities, grounding their existence in a deliberate act. Now, a necessary abstract object, like pure mathematics, cannot itself generate any concrete contingent beings. Numbers can't do anything. Numbers don't create universes. Numbers are just numbers. Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis claims that the universe is a mathematical structure, but even this view is highly speculative and controversial, and critics note that it struggles to explain why this particular structure obtains rather than others, and how mathematical entities can have genuine causal efficiency. In other words, to explain the specificity of our contingent world, the ultimate explainer must be capable of rational selection among alternatives. Rational selection is a feature of minds, so the necessary being is best understood as a self-existent, immaterial, timeless, immensely powerful mind. That leads to our final premise. Premise 11. A reality that is necessary, immaterial, timeless, unlimited in power, and capable of rational selection among alternatives is a self-existent, rational, free mind. We can now conclude that there exists a necessary, eternal, immaterial, supremely powerful, rational, and free mind that is the ultimate explanation of all contingent reality. That is exactly how classical theism defines God. At this point, many atheists do not so much refute the argument as take one of the two escape routes. The first route, and it is the most commonly used route they use, is to deny PSR and accept brute contingency. They grant that contingent beings exist, and they may even grant that if PSR holds, a necessary being follows. But they simply bite the bullet and say, there is no ultimate reason why any contingent reality exists. The universe or multiverse is just an inexplicable fact. Yet the cost of rejecting it is very high. At the ultimate level, reality becomes fundamentally unintelligible. There is a basic fact that something contingent exists, with literally no ground or reason. You can choose that position, but it is hard to call it a triumph of rationality. Now, the second route is to admit a necessary foundation, but deny it is God. Some skeptics concede that a world of only dependent things is impossible. There must be something necessary, but they suggest that this necessary entity might be impersonal. A necessary physical law, a necessary quantum state, or a necessary mathematical structure, as in Tegmark's hypothesis. We already answered some of these objections earlier, but the problem is that such proposals tend to either 1. Smuggle in contingency. Why this law? Why this quantum state? Why this structure? or it fails to have the right kind of casual, rational power to explain a richly contingent, rationally ordered universe. Moreover, once you admit that there is one ultimate necessary reality, self-existent, the source of all contingent beings, beyond space and time, and in some way rationally related to the order of the world, you're already far closer to the god of classical theism than to a bare impersonal stuff, or whatever you would like to call that. The theist's claim is that God is the best explanation of what the contingency argument has uncovered. Now, I haven't tried to prove that this necessary mind is specifically the Christian God, or that there's specific religions perfectly correct. What this argument aims to show is something more foundational, that if we take seriously the demand of explanation, if we refuse to end the story in brute, unexplained contingency, then we are naturally led to a necessary, self-existent, immensely powerful mind behind all contingent reality. If that's right, then atheism, as reality with no godlike foundation at all, becomes very hard to maintain. The further religious questions come after this step. You can escape it, but only by paying a price. Either deny the intelligibility of reality as its foundation and accept the radical brute facts, or posit some impersonal, necessary something which on examination begins to look suspiciously like a depersonalized version of God. The central question is not merely, can I logically avoid this conclusion? Almost any philosophical conclusion can be avoided if someone is truly determined enough. But the deeper question is, which worldview gives the best, most coherent explanation for why anything contingent exists at all? If you really think reality is fundamentally intelligible, if you believe that there are reasons, not sheer accidents, at the base of everything, then the path of explanation seems to terminate, not in absurdity or brute chaos, but in a necessary and self-existent mind. And that, historically and philosophically, is what has been called God.